Namaste. Hi, I'm Bruce Benefiel, and welcome to One World. Hi again, and welcome to this week's edition of One World. This week's guests are Eilleen Borris, who has a doctorate in psychology. She's also the founder of Peace Initiatives. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And Parviz Eshrati, and he also is on the advisory board of Peace Initiatives, and he's currently in the process of getting his doctorate in economics. And with no further ado, no, I'll take that back. Remember what Namaste is. It means I worship that which is within you. Don't forget that. With that, Eilleen, Parviz, glad to have you on the show.
Nice to be here.
Glad to be here.
Now, I mean, with Peace Initiatives, can you explain that a little bit, and then let's talk about what prompted you to get into it?
Well, Peace Initiatives is an organization I started about a year ago, which was really the result of the Gulf War. And the purpose is to bring people together, especially from different cultures, to help bring down the psychological barriers that keep us separate, and to also work with ethnic groups in conflict, those that consider themselves enemies, to bring them together. And so through open dialogues, healing memories workshops, seminars, gatherings of all sorts, people come together and really have an opportunity to learn about one another, to heal the emotional wounds that keep them separate from one another, and really begin to grow in understanding toward one another.
And you've been doing a lot of work going back and forth to Israel, too, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what prompted you to get involved with that? I know that's probably taken a period of years in your lifetime to develop. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Well, actually, the story probably began in 1971, although I wasn't aware of it. I was going to Columbia University at the time, which is just a wonderful place for a lot of mental stimulation, and I got very involved in studying the different spiritual disciplines. And at the same time, I was studying psychology and was involved with what was going on with Vietnam. And being very concerned about that and recognizing that in politics, it's set up in such an adversarial way that there must be a better way, is how I felt. And I had this dream of wanting to combine psychology, spirituality, and politics. So I made a commitment to myself to get my doctorate in psychology.
You mean you were going to bridge church and state?
I was.
Oh my God.
I was. And I was going to go first to the Soviet Union, which is what I ended up doing, actually. And study the different spiritual disciplines to see what we can do to eventually get it into politics. It was a wild dream. And as
they can be realized.
That can be realized. And little did I know, in 1977, I was asked to go to Findhorn with the president of Planetary Citizens. And I did... Don Keyes.
Right.
I did an 8-day workshop. He and I gave one together on the stance of the world warrior. And I did a lot of work with imagery. We would talk about things in the morning. I would do things right. And I would do things in the afternoon, such as meditation and working with symbology and really getting people in touch with the truth of who they were. And I really recognized that power and began to get very involved with the United Nations at that time. But I had to leave it because I was still involved in dissertation and research with cancer. And little did I know, working with the dying and working with people dealing with life-threatening illnesses was one of the most important things that could have happened to me, even though I felt like it was moving me away. It gave me a different feeling of life, a different appreciation, and I recognized that what was really missing was the fact that we had lost touch with the truth of who we were.
Right.
And then in the mid-'80s, I had been living in Washington, and I was invited to go to the Soviet Union in the midst of the Cold War as a citizen diplomat. And
That's
while
gotta
I
have
was...
been a pretty tremendous experience in itself.
It was. It was, because here I was taught that these people were part of the evil empire, and the first person I meet looks just like me.
I met the enemy, and he was me.
Yeah, really. Really,
Yeah.
because the enemy, that's me, is all the unconscious beliefs that we hold that keep the barriers.
Right.
And I looked into this woman's eyes and I saw a beautiful human being. And I said, my goodness, this is what it's all about. We have to recognize our humanness first, the spiritual essence. Everything else becomes secondary. And I got, at that point, to teach at the University of Odessa conflict resolution, which was based on the Course in Miracles and Buddhist psychology. But they didn't know it. And I came back to the States and I said that I must continue this work. And soon after that, I moved out here, and it became, I did a lot of traveling at that point, going back and forth to Costa Rica, to the Soviet Union, and now to the Middle East. And I recognized the gifts I had of getting to know all these people and to watch the barriers come down, which is what led me here.
That's been a phenomenal journey.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Parviz, how about you? Now, you also went through some things in Iran where you were asked to be the, or nominated as the
Minister of Industry and Mining.
Yeah. Let's get that correct. Minister of Industry and Mining.
Mining.
Okay.
We're not going to talk about any industries or mining, but as an economist, I basically review the affairs, world international affair, in a different angle, even though perhaps Dr. Borris and I would come to the same conclusion at the end, that we have to have peace and justice for all. I see the reason behind the majority of conflicts and misunderstanding to be greed and ignorance, and which is a very logical concept.
Sure.
To be an economist, I basically review things as an economic factor. And even though Dr. Borris sometimes brings to my attention that as an economist I only see the economic point of view of it, basically the human conflicts...
the bottom line, though.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Oh, we just love to have fun like this.
True. You know, it is, there are elements that Dr. Borris mentioned. There are social, psychological angles and point of view to it. But I view the whole concept of it to have an economic incentive behind it. And being from Middle East, you clearly experience that. Not only you observe it, not only you read about it, but you are the victim of one. So when I came back after the so-called, and I always say so-called revolution, recent revolution and Khomeini's inexistence in power, I was in a hideout and I came to America for the second time, and I was in the state of Washington. Recently I had the pleasure to be in Arizona, gladly, and I was attending the Peace Coalition at ASU, which is done by the university professors, and one day I met Dr. Borris looking for some people of Middle East, because she was going to Middle East to have these open dialogue between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And of course I was very much in favor of what she was doing, because basically when you create an atmosphere whereby you can bring people face to face, get them to experience that they're both human, that they're both have the same desires, and if we can momentarily forget the negative political propaganda that is on our little computer, that we can be very, very friend. And of course, being a peace activist, if you might say, and also a person that wants to see a logical solution to the problem rather than a most barbaric and Stone Age method of addressing to human conflicts, gave me the motive to be involved with Dr. Borris in Peace Initiative. And believe me, I have seen miracles with what she calls as open dialogue. I'm sure she's going to mention a few more words about open dialogue. Before I meet her, I'm doing some socioeconomic project with Native Americans. And a similar methodology that Dr. Borris is using was used by a few of the Native Americans that started in Alkali Lake. And they're using, they call it New Direction. They basically do intense training whereby they assist you to see the forces inside of you and bring that negativity into a positive force. And as a result, the people that are in that session end up with such a beautiful bond, and there is such a friendship and love between them that it's really undescribable unless you are in one of these sessions.
It's like what I used to open the show with, Namaste.
Exactly.
You know, it exemplifies, in my opinion, that desire of recognizing me and you and me.
Right.
Exactly.
The truth of who we are.
Right.
The interconnectedness.
Exactly. Now, going through this process, what kind of fears did you run into, and how did you overcome them?
Well, starting from my first trip to the Soviet Union, of just recognizing the natural fears of being in a place that was foreign to me and having to look at that.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, there were all kinds of fears that did come up for me. I just couldn't create something and move ahead, from fears of, am I capable of doing this? Fears of, will people take me seriously? Fears of succeeding in it, you know?
I find that that's one of the most common nowadays, is the fear of success, because there's so much available, and
will I be overwhelmed? Can I really carry this through? The projects of peace initiatives and the work isn't very intricate.
Did you find that when you made the decision to move that way, that everything else kind of seemed to come in around it? When you really made the commitment to move?
Yes. It's an interesting process, because if it doesn't happen that way, there's a reason for it too.
Right.
So I've learned to really trust the process.
And go with the flow.
And go with
Where'd
the
that
flow,
go?
yes.
Speaking of going with the flow, we've got to take a short break for a public service announcement, and we're going to find out more about job safety. We'll be right back with you. Thanks for tuning in.
When you've been doing a job a lot of years, you learn some useful tricks. How to do it right, how to do it safely. Being new on the job means keeping your eyes open, learning the rules, not taking shortcuts. And if you are injured on the job, workers' compensation can help. It's been helping for 75 years. But wouldn't it be better to do the job right? Keep safe and make my job easier.
Hi, and welcome back again. We're with Dr. Eilleen Borris and Parviz Eshrati. Eilleen, you were talking about fears. Now, you were going into the occupied territory. What was it like confronting the fear of what was happening in there and the possibility of the danger that was there?
That's right, and there's always very real possibilities. I do a lot of mind games when I go into the occupied territories, which will sound bizarre to people living here. I hear a car bomb go off in a car, and I say, well, I don't have to worry about another car bomb today. But I remember once in Ramallah being shot at, and it was to scare me, as well as a lot of other people. Ramallah is a town on the West Bank. And I froze. And a Palestinian woman walked very calmly to me, and she just said in a perfect English, "It's just noise." And one of the things that really keeps me going, because there's fears that come up all the time, not only safety and the inner struggles and the inner fears and all of that comes with the territory, because every day I'm encountering another fear. But then I just quiet myself and, you know, look at the fear and just
recognize it, shake its hand, and say thank you very much. And
that's right. And
See you later.
then kind of hook into the fact that there's a higher purpose here. It was the higher purpose that started in 1971 through my meditation experiences that brought me to wanting to combine all of this to begin with and to take me on this journey. And when I remember that and focusing on that, there's an inner calm.
Sure.
And that's what allows
Peace
me
that
to...
surpasses understanding,
That's
or something
right.
like that.
That's right. That allows me to move on.
Yeah. No, that's great. Now, that's something that we don't have to deal with here in the United States. You know, some areas do. And hopefully that, you know, through processes like yours, we can begin to overcome that with the open dialogue.
Well, this is also something that I use when I'm back in the States and I'm planning a project or trying to do some work that is bringing up something in me. If I focus back in on the purpose, then I can keep moving.
Right.
I would like to add what the comment you actually made right now is that I don't like people to get the understanding that the peace initiative's purpose is for overseas. Peace initiative basically is a criteria by which try to bring and create more understanding among people of diverse groups.
Right.
And I think there is much of it to be feared in America, because even though United States is which is my home and I'm a U.S. citizen, I don't want to sound as U.S. is a different entity for me. Even though United States is made of more diverse group of people, and superficially, and I underline superficially, we have learned through the fear of law to live with one another and perhaps cope with one another at work, but we have not yet accepted one another as another human being and try to establish a relationship.
Do you find that we really have the time, or that the time is given in the workplace?
I think it's beyond
which is really
even
where
that.
all the, I understand that, but the most common area is the workplace right now, because people mostly go home and spend time with their family or what have you.
I think the media has a great impact on American lifestyle. A lot of people right now rely on receiving their information from public television, radio, newspaper, and I think it's their major role is to create what you're just doing. Basically, by this show, you're bringing an awareness into people that there is a movement toward creating more understanding between people of the world.
There's hope.
Really, I mean,
And we're talking about attitudes.
I can tell you quite a few, which I'm not going to right now for the sake of time, but I can tell you the fears and the problems I have encountered as a foreigner.
What was the major one that you had?
Well, I don't know if it's the major one, but one of the recent one, I came back after the revolution, and unfortunately it was right about a month or so, quote unquote, after the hostage taking, and I just had bought the business in the state of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, I had a certain image of the cowboys, and a Montanian cowboy walked in, 6'4", with a cowboy hat, and he tapped me on the back. He tapped me on the back, and he says, "I take it that you are our host." And I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Where are you from with your accent?" I said, "Iran." He says, "What the hell is about the hostage taking?" And I looked at the 6'4" cowboy, and I said, "You're probably too stupid to understand, and I'm too naive to explain. You had nothing to do with it. I had nothing to do with it. Let's have a drink and forget it." And he shook my hand. And believe it or not, for the entire time I had the hotel, he became one of my very best friends, because I broke the barrier in my own way that I knew, to be caught on guard.
Do you find that we often separate ourselves, focusing on events that have world impacting through the media, and we don't take the time to really go beyond that and say, "Oh well, we're here now. How you doing?"
Very much so. Very much so.
Now, how do you see that being reflected? What you've experienced, Eilleen, being reflected in the world immediately around you?
We carry the images that's passed down from generation to generation. And we can see it very clearly in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
But we take on some of these unconscious beliefs, and we're not aware of them. And so when we meet people who we do not know, people from other cultures, because they're unfamiliar, fear comes up within us. And we may not take the time to really appreciate that person because we've already labeled them.
Mm-hmm.
We have forgotten that they're, first of all, human beings with the same hearts, the same souls, the same minds, wanting the same things, having the same kinds of dreams.
Right.
We've already labeled them, and they could be, again, the evil empire, or whatever group. We do a great job with whomever we want to. And so we've already separated ourselves from one another. Instead of focusing in on what are the common grounds here, and what are the things that we can share that are our gifts from our particular culture.
Do you find that in this exploration that we often don't know what questions to ask, or the ones that we do want to ask may seem, like we're offending to someone else? Is that...
That does happen. That does come up. But I'd rather ask a silly question and try.
I don't know of any stupid questions. I used to think about that, but as you move on, you find out that even the most subtle misunderstandings, if you can just initially get over them, there really isn't that much more to go.
And there's so many gifts. Just the gift of trying and joining with one another. And in the Soviet Union, when I went, I didn't speak Russian. And I was with so many Soviets who didn't speak English. And yet we could find a way of communicating, and the few words we did know could really make for a lot of fun, actually. But just by making the effort, trying to understand and communicating on some very basic levels, brought out the beauty of being human.
Speaking of communicating on some very basic levels, we're going to be right back with you. We've got to take another break for a public service announcement, and I believe this one's about AIDS. Talk to you soon.
If I told you I could save my life just by putting on my socks, you wouldn't take me seriously, because life is never that simple. But watch. Okay, you're right. That wouldn't really save my life. But there's something just as simple that could.
See, I told you we'd be talking again soon. We're with Eilleen Borris and Parviz Eshrati. And Parviz, how do you see the things that you've experienced being reflected in the world around you now? With peace initiatives, I'm sure that you're experiencing a lot more multicultural diversity or cultural diversity than most. How do you see that being reflected?
You see, the conflict basically comes from, as Dr. Borris was explaining, comes from lack of understanding and fear. And once you are from a different culture and a different background, you tentatively have more of the fear of asking questions that are not, it may be offending to the other person, rather than being yourself and being so real. I remember a very fundamental Christian stories we've been taught when we were 5 years old, that when a few of the disciples were walking in the streets and they came upon a dead dog. One of the disciples said, "Look how ugly it looks," and the other one said, "What a terrible smell," and everybody was making comment on the negative aspect. And Jesus Christ says, "But look at those beautiful set of white teeth." Meaning, if we try to look in the beauty, the inner beauty of the people, and try to build a foundation upon that, rather than trying to pinpoint the negatives and justify why we should be separated, the world is a better place to live.
Exactly. I mean, in regards to the barriers that you experience, how do you see those being overcome?
I think Parviz said it beautifully. You start appreciating people, accepting them for who they are. I mean, when I started the work with peace initiatives and wanted to meet people from the Middle East, I was so excited. I wanted to learn from them. And they knew that. They knew that was really genuine. And I could appreciate them, and they could feel that. And I could see the beauty in their culture, and they knew that too. And so that helped to bring down the barriers. And then we expanded, and there were people from Asia and people from all over the world. And everybody understood.
Do you have beetles too? We've got a beetle climbing up the curtain behind us. That's what I was looking back there. We've got a guess.
They can come too. You know,
Right.
there's something about them that's quite beautiful.
Right.
That was the whole idea. If we learn how to appreciate and accept one another for the truth of who we are, people know that. And it brings down the barriers and it brings people together. And we begin to learn how to give that to one another. And that's how we can overcome this.
Agreed. And it takes working together.
Yeah.
Being able, and the open dialogue, I think, that you do is just immensely important in that process, because you eliminate the barriers to begin with, or at least have that potential, it seems. Parviz, how do you see the barriers being overcome?
Whenever you allow people to express themselves without a fear, if you create an atmosphere where everyone feels comfortable, and the only way you can do it is to be your own self, your real self,
Authentic.
not the image that you want people to have of you when they leave. People can sense that. When
Yeah.
you're in peace and comfort within yourself, people around you can be very comfortable, they would open up to you. Once they open up their heart, then is a heart-to-heart interaction. There's no conflict.
What practical advice can you share? We're just about out of time. On an everyday level, what can people do?
To really listen to oneself, be true to oneself, understand oneself, and give that gift to others. The gift of understanding and total acceptance.
Sounds good to me. Parviz, how about you?
Every day you leave home, make sure you allow one person to enter your heart and try to get to know them as best you want to be known to them.
I can't top that. Thank you both very much. I have sincerely enjoyed our discussion and our open dialogue, and I'm sure that our guests have too. And I'd like to thank you all for tuning in at this time, and thank you for watching. Please, if you've got some comments or questions, keep those cards and letters coming, and you can even reach us by phone, and that's 602-264-0986. Or if you'd care to write us, you can reach us, care of One World, P.O. Box 32035, Phoenix, Arizona 85064. And please, do what you can to get involved in your own community, in your neighborhood, maybe even in your own house. I'm Bruce Benefiel, also known as Zendor. Namaste.